Stephen here from Class Act, and I thought I'd share with you a video showing you how to use this new product that we have in the store called modeling film. Art Parts, a division of Studio 490, Wendy Vecchi, clearly for art, whiteout modeling film. It's called whiteout here because these sheets are white, but it comes in black and it also comes in clear, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. The properties of this allow you to create 3D embellishments, and here I have some flowers that I cut out from the film, and I used various coloring techniques to add color to these. Now, because this is actually a plastic film, you heat it and you can mold your flowers or your butterflies or whatever you're creating, and I'm going to show you how to do that. But there's a variety of different types of materials you can use with this to create different effects. I used alcohol inks, for example, on this one to give the metallic look. Here I use StazOn ink and background stamp to add all these different colors, which might be difficult to see because this is on the clear modeling film. And this one is, and I'm going to talk more about this, is actually using Mod Podge or white glue mixed with perfect pearls and then paint it onto the petals, which gives it kind of a shimmery, kind of unique look. But there are other materials you can use as well. And so what I've done for this experimental demo, I'm going to call it, because I really don't know how any of this is going to turn out. So I'm trying a variety of techniques. Now, one of the techniques is to simply take a piece of pattern paper and I used some clear gel medium, but you could use white glue that dries clear. I just painted the backside of the clear sheets of modeling film and then just laid down a piece of patterned scrapbook paper on it. I'm not sure how this is going to work out, but I'm going to give it a try. This is a similar technique, but I got thinking, this is laminate. I actually have a hot laminator machine. I took one of the laminate pockets, I put some colored cardstock in between the layers, ran it through so it sealed it, and it's a plastic, and this stuff's a plastic. So I'm wondering, my idea is that if we make our flowers from this, that we can use the same heat method to curl it and bend it. We'll see if that works or not. This is on white modeling film, and I just used StazOn ink and a simple background stamp, and I used about 3 different colors, and I just stamped all over it. Now, the reason I'm using StazOn ink with this is because this is a non-porous surface, the plastic is, and so things like distress stain or distress ink or a dye-based ink are not going to stick to this because they have water-soluble properties and they'll just bead up and you can wipe them right off. On this piece, I decided to use Ranger's Archival inks for this because they're supposed to be waterproof. I did find that they took a while to dry. I tried to heat set them, but because this plastic reacts to heat, that's not so easy to do. And it's still smeared. You can see my little smear marks here where I dragged my finger across it. Now it's dry now, but what I did was I sprayed what's called a fixative. Artists use this to seal pastels and charcoals on paintings. I just gave it a light mist of that and let it dry. It dries within minutes. And that seems to keep it onto the film. Wendy Vecchi also shows you how to do this by putting a layer of Glue and Seal by Rangers, which is essentially a white glue. I've used Mod Podge, and you just smear it, paint it basically all over the surface of this, let it dry, it dries clear, and then it will take anything that's a water base product. So this time though, I didn't use that on this particular piece. I'm trying it with the fixative. This is alcohol ink. Now, you don't need to do any treatment of the material, the modeling film for this, because alcohol ink is meant to go on non-porous surfaces. And so I just used 3 colors and used the blender and just dabbed it on and got this marbled effect. Similarly, I did the same thing, only I used metallic gold and silver alcohol inks on this particular piece. On this piece, I actually used Mod Podge mixed with perfect pearls. I did about 3 different colors and just layered them on. And I used a paintbrush to paint them on. Now, the one thing I found was the Mod Podge dries very quickly, so you've got to mix it fast and get it on, because it'll start to get tacky very quickly. So we'll see what happens with this, how this turns out. That's what I actually did with the one flower that you see right here. I did the same thing, except with this one I'd already cut out the flowers, and then I painted on the different colors of Perfect Pearls mixed with the Mod Podge. So this one, I'm doing it a little reverse. I'm doing it before I cut out the flowers onto the whole piece. This particular piece, this is Distress Paint, dabbed on 3 different colors. Now, same thing here. It doesn't dry that well. I did a little bit of heat setting with this though, and that's why my page is a little warped. But I don't think that's going to cause me problems, because I'm going to be die cutting it and warping it again anyways, the shape. But I did find that this did take a little time to dry, but once it's dry, it seems to stay on there. Will it peel off? Well, I'm using my nail on it right now, and it doesn't seem to be. So we'll see how that works out. Similarly, I used the Delusions paints, which have great colors. I just applied a couple of colors here, the yellow and the blue, and that's why it's coming out green, with makeup sponges. And very similar to this technique, I just let it dry. I ran a heat gun over it very lightly. This seemed to dry much faster than the Distress paints did. And again, it doesn't seem to want to peel off, so that's a good thing. Just so you can see again what most of these I've put them on the white, but it comes in clear and it comes in black as well, and it's all the same properties. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to cut out a series of the Ariana Bloom's Heartfelt Creations die from each one of these cards. That's why I put them down to this size, because my die will fit on them perfectly. And I'm going to see what I get as I build each flower with each one of these different techniques. And probably I'll sort of rate it at the end of this video as to which techniques I think work the best. Okay, so that's what we're going to do next. I'm going to go off, I'm going to cut out my flowers, and then I'll return to show you how to put them together, how to mold them with your heat gun. Okay, for the first technique, I have my flowers cut out, and they're cut out of the clear modeling film that has been backed using Mod Podge, and actually I didn't use Mod Podge, I used clear matte medium gel with just some construction paper, patterned construction paper. So this side you see is kind of dull because that's where the paper is, and on the other side is my shiny part, the plastic. Now, the beauty of doing this with the paper is that we can add a little bit of Distress ink now all around the edges to the paper, and that's what I've done on the big one, and I'm going to do that on the medium size and the smaller one. Now, of course, Distress ink is not going to stick to the side that has the plastic, but it will stick where there's the paper. So I'm just going around onto the petal pieces. Now, I'm not sure which way is going to look the best when I start to mold this, so we'll just have to wait and see. But you can see I'm adding this, and that's making that stand out. Okay, so that was with Black Soot Distress ink. So let's move on here. When heating these, of course, they're going to get hot, and there's several different types of heat guns you can get. I am going to use my embossing heat gun because it's hotter. I have been using the Tim Holtz heat gun, the one that looks like, let me pull it up here into the shot, looks like this. But I find that it will work, but it's not as, the heat isn't quite as hot, so it takes me a little longer to mold the petals, but it will work. But I'm going to try the other one, and I'm also trying this one for another reason. I find it very awkward trying to heat it and hold it in my hand so I don't burn my fingers, and even if I'm holding it with tweezers, I still have that problem. But this particular heat gun has a little stand, so I'm going to make use of that stand. So what I want to do is heat it up and then mold the plastic. And of course I'm using the tweezers that work in reverse, that they stay closed when, if you don't apply pressure to them, and when you do they open, because I find that's easier to hang on to things. So let's turn on the heat gun, and we'll hold it in front of it. And just mold it up. That does get hot. It is very hot, actually. Okay, so you can see that I've started to get a little bit of shape here. And all I did was bend them up and pinch them. And in fact, I think I'm going to bend them up a little bit more. But one thing I have found using this heat gun, this is extremely hot. Okay, much hotter than the Tim Holtz heat gun. And although that's making quick work of this, I'm not sure what I got on my leaf here. Hope it's not my blood. No, it's not. And even though the other one will do it, it's just awkward. Doesn't have a stand. There's something. If Tim Holtz had built a stand on the thing, it might work better. Wait, just had an idea. What if I use the gun? Get my cords out of the way here. Would it sit up like this? Sit like that? I don't know. I'm going to go back to the other one. That one I'm going to have to play with. Also, it's caught on some of my stuff underneath here. So, anyways, now, as I said, I want to bend these up a little bit more. So I'm going to put my tweezers back on here, turn this on. Sorry for the noise. Okay, so I got it into a little cup thing. So what I'm going to do is the same with these next two, but I'm not going to do these on camera because you get the idea, the same effect. I'll come back in a minute and show you how I'm going to assemble them and how they look. Okay, so here's my finished flower. As you can see, I heat curled the other petals around, and this is the side that the paper is actually on the top. On the back side, you can see how shiny it is. That's the actual plastic, which you could probably do this in the reverse if you like that effect. But as I said, you're not going to see the distress ink that went around the edges because it just wipes right off the plastic. So I've done it this way. But now I'm thinking, well, if I want to add a little glitz to it, I could use a little bit of glitter dust, or I could use my clear Wink of Stella and go over it. Now, I think I will do that later on when I finish these off. And I'd probably put a little something in the center in here as well. So as far as the method is concerned, this works fairly well if you want to be able to add distress ink to your flower petals. The one thing I'm not so sure about is using that super heat gun. It did get hot, and I didn't really burn myself, but it got hot at one point where I had to drop that. But I like the stand, so maybe I can jerry rig something up with the other type of heat gun for that. Also, one thing I didn't mention, when I cut these did not cut that well. I even shimmed up. I was using my magnetic platform, and I was using my precision steel base, which, if you don't know what that is, works really well. It replaces the bottom acrylic cutting mat, and it allows your die, you put your paper down, you put your die cutting side down on top of that, and then one acrylic pad on top. And on those really wafer thin dies, it cuts very cleanly. But I found with the plastic, with the paper on it, I had to run it through the machine several times, and even then, and it might be just this particular die, I'm not sure, I had to actually free some of the pieces up by making little cuts with my scissors into it. Now, I didn't have any problem when I cut just the plain modeling film itself using this plate. It seems with that added layer of paper, it was just that much thicker that it couldn't cut all the way through. Almost did, but not quite. So that's something I've learned about this method. But I think it's very workable. So, variation. Here's my cheap version, or using something that you don't have to buy, which is probably not a good idea to tell you because we would like to sell you this in the store. But if you have a heat laminator, you can take a piece of your scrapbooking paper, put it between the layers of the laminating pocket, run it through on a high heat, and then trim it down to the size that you want. And it ran through the die cutter no problem. Now the difference here is right at this point is that both sides now have plastic on them as opposed to this method that has paper covering one side of it. So my theory is this is plastic, that is plastic, heat melts plastic. If I use the heat gun, will I be able to curl my leaves on this? So let's give it a shot and see. Okay, yes, you can. However, I notice when you start to heat it, if you leave it too long, the film starts to go cloudy. The plastic starts to go cloudy. However, I'm noticing once it cools down, for the most part, that seems to disappear. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish curling these pieces up and I'm going to assemble it. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned I assembled it with glue dots. That seemed to hold the best with these. Because this is plastic too, other glues may or may not hold as well, but the glue dots seem to hold very well. So I'm going to finish this flower off and come back and show you the results. So here's my flower now created. And again, this is using the laminated pockets on here. Actually, I think it worked very, very well. See if I can bring it up a little bit closer to the screen so you can see that. The only problem now that you have is because this is a plastic, you're not going to be able to do anything on the tips with anything that is a distress ink. But you might be able to brush on a little bit of StazOn ink around the edges here. You might even be able to put a little bit of acrylic paint on here. I'm not sure if it would peel off or not, but I know on my one sample piece that I have yet to cut that I used acrylic paint. Well, no, I used distress paint on that, and it did dry and adhere to it. But this is plastic, so I'm not sure if that'll happen, but maybe I'll give it a try and find out. Again, I could finish it off with a little something in the center, and I may come to that at the end of the video and show you what the final products look like. So what I want to move on to next are the next two products that I used. On these flowers, I used StazOn ink and a background stamp. And on these flowers, I use the Archival, Ranger Archival ink. And remember, the StazOn dries very, very quickly and is specifically formulated to go on non-porous materials. However, the Ranger ink, which says it's waterproof, it took a little longer to dry on this. And as I said, this is the one that I sprayed with that final fixative. And if you've never seen this spray, you can get it at most art stores. And this is what it comes in, different brands, but this is what it's called, Final Fixative. It's a spray. It does have a smell. I put it inside a little box and give it a shot when I'm working indoors. If you're sensitive to fumes, then you're going to want to do this outdoors. You don't need very much. You just give it a light spraying. It's kind of like a hairspray. And in fact, having said that, I'm thinking that maybe if you wanted a cheaper version, you could probably use a hairspray that dries very quickly. The same thing. All it does is acts as a sealer so that your inks don't smudge. That's what I used here. You could also have painted these with a white glue or a Mod Podge first, let that dry, and then apply the ink as well. So anyways, on this one, I used the fixative. So let's see what happens with these. So we'll go to our StazOn ones first, and we're going to use the same method for curling up our flowers as we did the last time. Only this time, I'm going to try to curl all the flowers at once. Okay, so I've got this cupped, And I could do that the rest of them. But let's say you don't like this. This is another property. It's not permanent. You heat this again and it'll flatten right back out. So as you'll see here, oops, there we go, in seconds. Flattened it right back out. I might try just bending these and giving them a little bit of a curl inwards. We'll see what happens with that. Okay, so I've kind of curled them inwards, if you can see that in the camera. And on this particular one, I think what I'm going to do is do the little curl up and pinch, sort of what I did to the center, the medium one here. You can see that. So let's see what happens. Okay. And I think I want to curl these up a little bit more, so I'm going to apply a little more heat. Okay, so I was having a little problem when I was doing that because that property of it, when it flattens itself back out when heat is applied, was taking the curl out of my petals. So basically you have to play with it a little bit until you get the shape you want. So actually though, I think that doesn't look too bad at all that way. And I'm going to curl this one. I think I'll curl it in like I did with this one, just on the inside. And I'll be back to show you the final result of that. Okay, so here's my final flower. Remember, this one's using StazOn, and I just curled the bottom ones inwards a little bit and just did something a little more funky with it, and I'm kind of liking that too. So there's a lot of variations you can do. You just use your imagination and play around with how the plastic melts and mold it about. Now, I'm going to go off and I'm going to do the other types of flowers, and when I return, I'll show you the finished products. So here are my finished flowers. These were the original 3 that I showed you when I started the video on here. And one thing I didn't mention was, in order to get this black to come up from the bottom of this one, this is the method that I used, where I put white glue, Mod Podge, let it dry on the clear modeling film, and then I dabbed on a couple of different shades of metallic alcohol ink using my ink applicator, and that gives it sort of a metallic look. But here are all the ones that I did today, the different ones. So here we have the ones that were the paper that was applied to the clear modeling film. And what I did with this was, to accentuate it, I used the Distress ink along the edges, and it takes it very well because that's paper. But you can see these are going to hold their shape. They will, once they're molded, they are not going to flatten out unless you apply a lot of heat to them. And then this was the one I used with the laminating sheets. And as I said, I wasn't sure how I would edge this, but I just used a black magic marker, a fine tip one, and just sort of went around the edges just to give it a very light shadow effect. All of the flowers have sparkle on them now, because I added clear Wink of Stella to them all, even to this clear plastic one that I used the archival ink on, which actually gives it a very, I don't know if it shows up in the light here, but gives it sort of a fairy dust effect. On the silver one, I did a little experiment. I added a little bit of paint marker onto this, and it sort of bled into it. I don't know if it was because the Wink of Stella was still a little wet or just the properties of the alcohol ink that's underneath, but you know, I kind of like the effect. The other ones, I didn't necessarily do anything to the edges of them, but now I've got quite an array of flowers, and the beauty of these ones are they will not get squished down like paper ones will. However, as you can see, the different materials that you might put on them do have different properties. So you have to do a little bit of experimentation. And one thing, be very, very careful. You're using heat. It gets hot very quickly and you could burn yourself. So do be careful when you're doing this technique. And here's a bonus. I cut out my flowers from the sheets that I had already pre-colored. And now guess what I've got? A whole bunch of stencils. And these are fairly substantial stencils because they're basically made out of plastic. So little bonus there. Don't throw away your cutaways. These could be used in your mixed media journal or as a background for a scrapbook page or a card. So there you have it. That's the modeling film and how to use it. And we sell it at the store. So come on in and ask me about it. And I'll be happy to tell you whatever I can about it.